We are all aware of the historical financial indebtedness of African nations to the Western world, as they have borrowed money for development and struggled with repayments, leading to debt traps orchestrated by the International Monetary Fund, IMF, and the World Bank. The ongoing exploitation of African nations, which dates back to colonial times, makes it difficult for them to break free from debt cycles. This is precisely what the Western-led IMF desires. The more debt African countries accumulate, the more they are bound by Western conditions. This continuous cycle hampers African nations' growth and keeps them ensnared in debt traps. However, President Lazarus Chakwera of Malawi has taken a bold step by demanding the cancellation of Malawi's debts. Firmly stated that Malawi will no longer pay these debts due to the exorbitant interest rates and the fact that they have already paid more than the principal amount. During his speech at the United Nations General Assembly, he gave an ultimatum to Western countries, warning them of undesirable consequences if the debts were not cancelled. This declaration has sparked curiosity regarding his intentions and what actions he may take to back his demand. President Chakwera's call for debt cancellation is driven by the unsustainable debt burden that plagues not only Malawi but many least developed countries, LDCs. These debts have impeded economic progress and hindered these countries' ability to catch up with more economically advanced nations. Rather than being a source of support, these loans perpetuate the cycle of indebtedness, as countries take on more debt to repay earlier loans, trapping them in a never-ending debt cycle. Chakwera's demand is further strengthened by his reminder that the United Nations aims to end poverty by 2030. This goal is impossible to achieve if African nations are burdened with debt payments. To achieve real progress, developed countries must acknowledge that debt cancellation is the solution for developing nations. President Chakwera continues to engage proactively with international institutions to secure financial support for Malawi's economic growth. Currently, Malawi grapples with substantial debt, particularly its commitments to the IMF, which hinders the country's economic advancement. Servicing this debt consumes a significant portion of the national budget, diverting funds that could be used for critical sectors such as healthcare, education, infrastructure development, and poverty alleviation. The burden of debt deprives the government of the ability to invest in vital infrastructure development, which plays a crucial role in fostering economic growth and attracting foreign investments. Instead of alleviating economic crises, these debts begin to jeopardize countries like Malawi, leading them into debt distress and making them reliant on foreign aid. IMF loans, while ostensibly intended to help, often come with stringent policy conditions such as fiscal austerity measures and structural reforms, which limit a country's ability to make decisions aligned with its long-term development goals. Additionally, the volatility of the US dollar complicates debt repayment efforts in countries like Malawi. Exchange rate fluctuations can significantly increase the cost of repaying debt in local currency terms, further straining the country's finances. A depreciating local currency can lead to higher inflation rates, affecting economic stability and the purchasing power of consumers and businesses. Ultimately, IMF loans, rather than assisting, can exacerbate economic challenges for African nations. In recent years, African countries have faced a growing debt crisis, with a significant portion of their budgets allocated to servicing these debts. The IMF, through its loans and conditions, exercises control over African nations and restricts their progress. Chakwera's demand for debt cancellation is a response to this dire situation, where countries have been servicing their debts for decades, consuming their national budgets, and perpetuating the cycle of debt. As the debt crisis deepens in many low-income African nations, the call for debt cancellation gains urgency. African governments are seeking a more inclusive global financial system, with greater emphasis on the needs of developing countries. They are concerned that the current system prioritizes climate change efforts at the expense of poverty alleviation and shared prosperity in low-income nations. The increasing challenges faced by sub-Saharan African economies, such as public debt, double-digit inflation, and limited access to alternative sources of funding, underscore the need for reform in the Bretton Woods financial institutions. African nations are becoming less willing to accept a status quo in which wealthy countries dictate decisions about the system's operation, given the emergence of other financial partners. In conclusion, President Chakwera's call for debt cancellation is a response to the dire economic situation faced by Malawi and many other African nations. It reflects the need for reform in the international financial system to address the challenges that low-income countries face, including their growing debt burdens. Now we would like to throw out a question to our audience. Should debt cancellation be considered for the Malawians and Africa in general, given that the pressing issues related to debt traps and economic growth?